Mafia boss heard a maid whisper, "Run," in the elevator. What happened next saved his empire. Why did the maid suddenly whisper that urgent warning inside the elevator? What danger was approaching that could threaten everything the Mafia boss had built? Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Mercy Behind the Throne, where one quiet word can expose a threat powerful enough to change countless lives. Before today's story begins, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another suspenseful episode. Thank you for watching, commenting, sharing, and continuing to support this channel. Every bit of encouragement helps Mercy Behind the Throne reach audiences around the world. Let us know in the comments where in the world you are watching from and what time it is there right now. We truly appreciate having you with us. Now, get comfortable, stay alert, and let us enter the first moments of today's unforgettable story. He thought she was just a maid, a quiet woman with a laundry cart and lowered eyes, but in the next 30 seconds, Naomi Brooks would become the only reason Dominic Whitmore still owned an empire. The private elevator at Whitmore Tower rose above downtown Chicago like a glass coffin wrapped in gold light, its polished walls reflecting the city far below, the Black River, the silver rooftops, the traffic crawling like red veins through the streets. Dominic stood in the center without touching the rail, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a midnight suit that looked carved onto him, his white face unreadable beneath the soft glow of the elevator lights. Men in Chicago whispered his name in back rooms and boardrooms alike, but inside that elevator, he was silent, patient, surrounded by people paid to protect him and followed by people desperate to replace him. Naomi stood in the rear corner with a stack of folded towels against her chest, wearing the gray uniform of the night staff, the kind of uniform powerful people never remembered and never apologized to. Her dark hands held the towels neatly, but her eyes were not on the floor the way the staff manual demanded. They were on Nolan Pierce, Dominic's head of security. More precisely, they were on the small black mark peeking from beneath Nolan's cuff, fresh ink against pale skin, 3 narrow lines crossed by a circle, a symbol Naomi had seen once before in a photograph her brother Caleb left behind before the night everything in her life broke. The elevator doors slid shut with a soft expensive sigh. No one spoke. The numbers climbed. 41. 42. 43. Dominic's penthouse meeting waited on the 50th floor, where his fiancée, Claire Hastings, smiled for cameras, where Victor Sloan held contracts thick enough to bury a man alive, where the board expected Dominic to sign papers that would supposedly secure his shipping lanes, hotels, and private banks for another generation. Naomi knew better. For 6 weeks, she had cleaned conference rooms after midnight, emptied trash from locked offices, wiped fingerprints from glass tables where men forgot that silence was not the same as stupidity. She had heard names spoken too softly. She had seen elevator schedules changed after hours. She had found a maintenance panel left open by half an inch. And now Nolan's wrist carried the final answer. Dominic did not know the enemy was not waiting upstairs. The enemy was standing close enough to adjust his collar. Naomi's heartbeat struck her ribs like a trapped bird, but her face stayed still. Women like her learned early that fear was safest when folded away. The elevator hummed. The camera light above the doors flickered once, then died. Nolan's hand moved toward his jacket, casual, practiced, almost invisible. Naomi lifted her eyes to the mirrored wall and met Dominic's reflection. For the first time, he truly looked at her. Not at the uniform. Not at the towels. At her. Her lips barely moved. Run. Dominic's hand stopped inches from the gold button panel. The elevator kept rising. The room went silent. 6 weeks earlier, Naomi Brooks had entered Whitmore Tower through the service door on West Wacker Drive with a borrowed coat, $37 in her purse, and a resume so plain nobody thought to question it. The tower rose 70 stories over downtown Chicago, all blue glass and white stone, the kind of building that looked clean. Because people like Naomi were paid to erase every fingerprint before morning. At the security desk, a young guard barely glanced at her face. He looked at the uniform bag in her hand, the work shoes, the neat braids pinned beneath a simple scarf, and decided he already knew her story. Another night maid. Another quiet woman. Another person the rich would pass without seeing. That was exactly what Naomi needed him to think. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Alvarez, handed her a badge with no photo and a list of rules printed on thick paper. Do not speak to executives unless spoken to first. Do not enter private offices without clearance. Do not use guest elevators. Do not ask about meetings after midnight. Do not touch sealed envelopes, unlocked phones, or documents left in conference rooms. Naomi read each line once, then folded the paper carefully into her pocket. She understood rules. She also understood that powerful people wrote rules to protect secrets, not truth. Her first shift began at 9 o'clock that night, when the city outside glittered with summer heat and the offices emptied into silence. She pushed a gray cleaning cart across marble floors that reflected her face in broken pieces. She emptied trash cans lined with imported leather bins. She replaced hand towels softer than the blankets in her apartment. She wiped down a conference table so long it could seat a jury, then paused when she saw the skyline burning orange in the glass. For one breath, she let herself remember Caleb. Her younger brother had once stood beside an elevator motor room in this same tower, smiling through a video call, telling her he had finally found a steady job with real benefits. 3 weeks later, he was gone, and every official answer sounded too polished to be honest. Naomi had not come to Whitmore Tower for money, though she needed it. She had come because Caleb left one message behind, written on the back of a parking receipt and hidden inside an old toolbox. Whitmore Tower. Elevator. Trust no one. Those words had followed her through job interviews, background checks, and sleepless nights. So she became what the tower wanted her to be. She became invisible. She learned which doors clicked shut at midnight and which ones never locked at all. She learned that Victor Sloan stayed late on Thursdays and shredded documents twice. She learned that Claire Hastings arrived smiling for charity meetings but left through private exits with men who never signed visitor logs. She learned that Nolan Pierce checked every camera except the ones near the service corridor, because men like Nolan believed maids used hallways, not memory. Naomi said good evening. Naomi said yes, ma'am. Naomi said nothing else. But while she polished brass and folded linen, she collected tiny truths the way other people collected coins, one overlooked detail at a time, until the tower that had swallowed her brother began whispering back. Caleb Brooks had always been the one who believed machines told the truth better than people. When Naomi was a teenager in Bronzeville, he used to take apart broken radios on their kitchen table and put them back together before their mother came home from the hospital. He said every system had a rhythm, every wire had a reason, and every failure left a trace if someone cared enough to look closely. Naomi had laughed then, calling him a little old man with grease on his fingers, but Caleb never minded. He wanted to be the kind of technician who could walk into a building, hear one wrong hum behind a wall, and know exactly what was sick inside it. By 24, he had become that man. He fixed elevators in towers where executives never learned his name. He carried a tool belt heavier than some briefcases and came home smelling faintly of metal, dust, and rain. The week before he died, he called Naomi from a loading dock outside Whitmore Tower. His voice was lower than usual, careful in a way that made her sit up in bed. He told her he had found something strange in the private elevator system, not a simple malfunction, not a wiring mistake, but an extra layer hidden behind the security controls. Naomi asked him if he had reported it. Caleb went quiet. Then he said some buildings were not built to protect people inside them, but to protect the secrets of the people who owned them. She told him to come home. He said he would, after one more look. That was the last normal conversation they ever had. The official report came 3 days later with cold language and clean signatures. Mechanical failure. Unfortunate incident. No evidence of misconduct. Naomi read those words until they blurred, then read them again because grief made even lies feel like walls you could not climb. At the service, men from the contractors stood near the back in pressed suits, speaking softly about insurance and privacy. No one from Whitmore Tower came. No one from Dominic Whitmore's office called. Caleb, who had climbed inside the bones of their building, became paperwork by Monday morning. But Naomi knew her brother. He checked locks twice. He photographed panels before opening them. He did not leave wires loose or take foolish risks. Weeks later, while cleaning out his small apartment in Cicero, Naomi found the parking receipt folded into the lining of his toolbox. Whitmore Tower. Elevator. Trust no one. The words were written in Caleb's blocky handwriting, but the last line had been pressed so hard the ink nearly cut through the paper. That was when sorrow changed shape. It stopped being a weight and became a direction. Naomi studied at night. She read manuals, safety codes, maintenance schedules, and public filings. She learned the names of shell companies connected to the tower. She learned that Victor Sloan had approved an emergency security upgrade 2 days before Caleb's last shift. She learned that the elevator her brother warned her about did not appear on any public diagram. So when the cleaning agency called and asked if she could start immediately at Whitmore Tower, Naomi looked at Caleb's note one last time, folded it into her wallet, and said yes in a voice calm enough to fool even herself. Dominic Whitmore entered most rooms as if the walls had already agreed to move for him. Naomi saw him for the first time on her 5th night at the tower, just after 11 o'clock, when the executive lobby had emptied and the marble floors still smelled faintly of lemon polish. The private doors opened without a sound, and he walked through surrounded by 3 men in dark suits, his steps slow, measured, almost quiet. He was not loud like the men who wanted to be feared. He did not need to raise his voice. The air changed before anyone said his name. He was 38 years old, white, broad across the shoulders, with silver at one temple and eyes pale enough to look almost colorless beneath the lights. The newspapers called him a logistics king, a hotel investor, a private lender with old Chicago discipline and new money reach. Men in back rooms called him something else. Naomi lowered her eyes as Mrs. Alvarez had taught her, but she watched his reflection in the polished elevator doors. He looked untouched by the world, like a man carved from winter stone, yet the people around him were nervous. That was the first thing she noticed. Not his power. Their fear. Victor Sloan walked half a step behind him, carrying a leather folder against his chest like a shield. Nolan Pierce stayed to Dominic's right, scanning corners with the calm of someone who had done the same thing 1,000 times. Claire Hastings arrived a few minutes later in a cream-colored coat, smiling at the receptionist as if every camera in the building belonged to her. Together, they looked like the perfect circle around a powerful man. But circles could protect, or they could trap. Over the next weeks, Naomi learned the rhythm of Dominic's empire by what people tried to hide from the cleaning staff. Trucks from his shipping company were being delayed at the port. 2 hotel partners in Miami had stopped returning calls. A private account in Delaware had been accessed 3 times from an unknown terminal. Men who used to wait hours for a meeting with Dominic now sent polite excuses through assistants. Something was weakening him, not from the street, not from a rival family, but from inside the polished machinery of his own life. She heard Victor speak in soft numbers after midnight, always careful, always smooth. She heard Claire laugh on the phone in the South Conference Room, then fall silent whenever footsteps passed. She saw Nolan change a camera angle with his own badge and tell the guard it was a routine update. Every detail alone meant nothing. Together, they made Caleb's warning feel alive. Dominic seemed to sense the pressure but not the source. He moved through it with that same cold control, signing papers, taking calls, standing before floor-to-ceiling windows while Chicago glittered beneath him like a city he owned by memory. But Naomi saw what he could not. His trusted people had begun speaking around him instead of to him. His empire was not being attacked at the gates. It was being unlocked from the inside, one quiet door at a time. The first clue was almost laughably small, the kind of thing a tired cleaner might sweep into a dustpan and forget. A single stainless steel screw lay beneath the gold-trimmed wall panel outside the private elevator on the 48th floor. Naomi found it at 1:19 in the morning, resting near the baseboard where the vacuum could not reach. She knew it did not belong there. Caleb had taught her that elevator panels were not held together by luck, and a missing screw meant somebody had opened something they expected no one else to inspect. She picked it up with a tissue, slipped it into the side pocket of her cart, and kept mopping as if nothing in the world had changed. 2 nights later, the maintenance log on the service tablet showed a routine systems check scheduled for Friday, but the elevator had already been serviced on Wednesday. The entry was signed by a technician named Paul Merritt, yet the badge photo attached to the record showed a man Naomi had never seen in the building. That mattered because Naomi knew the regular technicians by their shoes before she knew their names. Real maintenance workers left scuffs, grease, and coffee breath in the service hall. This man had left nothing but a false signature and a faint smell of burnt plastic near the control room. On the third night, Naomi waited until the executive floors emptied and pushed her cart slowly past the restricted corridor. The camera above the service door was angled 3 inches too high, just enough to miss the lower half of the hallway. Nolan Pierce had changed that angle himself. Naomi had seen him do it with a security tablet, then smile at the guard and call it an update. She did not enter the control room. She only paused beside it, pretending to tie her shoe, and listened. Behind the locked door came the soft pulse of electronics, steady at first, then a quick double click that repeated every 10 seconds. Caleb had once played that sound for her from an old training video. Remote relay. External override. Her mouth went dry, but her hands stayed calm. The next clue came from Victor Sloan's trash. At 3:40 in the morning, Naomi emptied the silver bin beside his desk and found a torn shipping label stuck to the inside of a coffee cup. Most of the numbers had been ripped away, but one line remained clear. Biometric Access Module, Private Lift Series. Not explosive. Not decorative. A lock. The kind of device that could freeze an elevator between floors, disable the cameras, and hold a man exactly where his enemies needed him while the rest of the world was told there had been a medical emergency, a technical failure, an unfortunate delay. Naomi stood alone in the quiet office, the torn label in her gloved hand, and felt Caleb's note burning in her wallet like a second heartbeat. This was never about taking Dominic out in front of witnesses. It was cleaner than that. Colder. They were going to trap him above his own city while Victor and Claire took his empire with smiles, signatures, and sealed doors. By the evening of the signing, Whitmore Tower looked less like an office building and more like a cathedral built for money. Black cars lined the curb along West Wacker Drive. Men in tailored coats moved through the lobby with quiet urgency. The front desk wore brighter smiles than usual, the kind people used when they were afraid a mistake might cost them more than a reprimand. On the 50th floor, waitstaff arranged crystal glasses along a conference table long enough to divide families. White roses stood in tall vases beside polished folders stamped with Dominic Whitmore's crest, and every elevator screen in the executive bank glowed with a private access notice. Naomi watched from the service corridor with a linen cart in front of her and Caleb's note folded inside her shoe, because that was the one place nobody searched. She had been ordered not to work above the 42nd floor that night. Mrs. Alvarez had pulled her aside at 6 o'clock, her face tight with worry, and said the instruction came from Mr. Sloan himself. All night staff were to remain below the executive levels until the signing was finished. Naomi had nodded, accepted the order, and spent the next hour folding towels with hands steady enough to frighten her. A person who had nothing to hide did not remove cleaners from floors they had cleaned for weeks. A person who feared witnesses did. At 7:32, Victor Sloan stepped out of the South Conference room wearing a navy suit and a smile so smooth it felt manufactured. He carried 2 folders instead of 1. The first was white, the official agreement Dominic was meant to sign. The second was gray, thin, tucked beneath his arm with the careful pressure of a man holding the real weapon in a room full of decoration. Claire Hastings arrived 10 minutes later in ivory silk and pearls, graceful enough to make every receptionist stand straighter. She kissed the air near Victor's cheek, never touching him, never looking directly at the security camera above them. Naomi saw her lips move. Not long now. Nolan Pierce stood near the private elevator, speaking into his earpiece, his posture relaxed, his eyes too awake. At 7:48, the service elevator opened on the 44th floor, and Naomi stepped inside with her cart before the doors could close. She did not have clearance. She did not have permission. She had only 6 weeks of details, 1 dead brother's warning, and the terrible certainty that silence would make her part of the lie. The elevator carried her upward, humming through steel and glass. 45. 46. 47. At the 48th floor, the doors opened, and for 1 second she saw the city beyond the windows, bright and indifferent, as if nothing human could fall from so high. Then Dominic Whitmore appeared at the end of the hall, moving toward the private lift with Nolan beside him and 2 guards behind. Dominic's face was calm, but the air around him felt sharpened. Naomi pushed her cart forward. Nolan's eyes cut toward her. "You are not supposed to be here," he said. Naomi lowered her head. "Fresh towels for the penthouse, sir." He reached for her badge, but Dominic was already watching her. Not the uniform. Not the cart. Her hands. They were not trembling. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then the private elevator opened with a soft chime, gold light spilling across the floor like a trap pretending to be welcome. The private elevator waited with its doors open, bright, silent, and patient, as if it had not been rebuilt to hold a king inside his own tower. Dominic stepped in first. Nolan followed at his right shoulder. The 2 guards entered behind them, and Naomi pushed her linen cart across the threshold before Nolan could stop her. For half a second, everyone looked at her. In a building where staff were trained to disappear, stepping into the private lift was almost an act of rebellion. Nolan's jaw tightened. Dominic said nothing. The doors slid closed, sealing them inside a polished box of glass, brass, and reflected faces. Naomi stood in the rear corner with her hands wrapped around the cart handle. The city dropped beneath them in pieces, 1 glowing street at a time. 48. 49. The button for the 50th floor burned red, brighter than the others, though Dominic had not touched it. Naomi saw Nolan's thumb brush the side of his security watch. She saw the camera light above the panel blink once, then fade into darkness. She saw one of the guards look away too quickly, as if he had been instructed not to see what was about to happen. The air thinned. Dominic's reflection met hers in the mirrored wall, cool and unreadable, but Naomi noticed the smallest change in him. His shoulders did not move, yet his attention sharpened. He had built his life by reading rooms before they turned against him. This was not a room. It was worse. It was a room with no exits. Naomi felt Caleb's note under her foot, folded inside her shoe, pressing against her soul like a pulse. Trust no one. She wanted to speak clearly. She wanted to say Nolan is compromised, the elevator is rigged, Victor is waiting upstairs with false papers, Claire knows, your empire is being taken from inside your own signature. But words that large would take too long, and long sentences got people dismissed. The elevator slowed, not at the 50th floor, but between floors, a subtle drag beneath their feet. Nolan's eyes flicked toward the panel. There it was. The confirmation. Naomi leaned forward, close enough for Dominic to hear and quiet enough that the others might mistake it for breath. Run. The word entered the elevator like a match dropped in darkness. Dominic did not turn his head. He did not ask who she was. He did not ask why a maid had dared to warn him. He simply watched her in the mirror, and for the first time in 6 weeks, Naomi saw something human move behind the ice in his eyes. Calculation. Doubt. Recognition. Then the elevator gave a soft warning chime and stopped at the 44th floor, a floor it had no reason to visit. The doors opened on an empty service hallway lit by one flickering fluorescent tube. Nolan shifted first. Too fast. Dominic moved faster, not with panic, but with decision. He stepped backward through the opening and caught the edge of Naomi's cart with one hand, pulling it with him just enough to jam the door. Towels spilled across the threshold in a white wave. Nolan said his name sharply, no longer polished, no longer respectful. Dominic did not answer. Naomi dropped to one knee and pressed the emergency hold beneath the cart frame, the hidden service latch Caleb had once shown her in an old manual. The doors shuddered, confused between closing and reopening. For 3 endless seconds, the elevator could not decide who owned it. Then Dominic looked down at Naomi Brooks, the maid nobody remembered, and said in a voice so quiet the hallway seemed to lean closer, "Lead the way." Naomi moved before fear could catch up with her. She shoved the linen cart deeper into the doorway, forcing the elevator doors to struggle against the soft mountain of towels, then slipped into the service hallway with Dominic half a step behind her. The fluorescent light above them flickered, turning his face pale, then shadowed, then pale again. Behind them, Nolan's voice came through the narrowing gap, controlled but stripped of courtesy. "Mr. Whitmore, this is not secure. Step back." Inside. Dominic did not look back. That was when Naomi understood something about him that no newspaper profile had ever printed. He was dangerous, yes, but not because he enjoyed power. He survived because once he chose a direction, he did not waste a breath explaining it to people who had already betrayed him. The elevator doors finally pushed the cart aside and closed with a soft mechanical sigh. For 1 second, silence held the hallway. Then the lift rose without them, carrying Nolan and the 2 guards toward the 50th floor, toward the trap that had been designed for Dominic alone. Naomi grabbed a ring of service keys from beneath a folded towel and ran toward a gray door marked janitorial access. Her shoes made almost no sound on the concrete. Dominic followed, his polished dress shoes striking the floor with quiet precision. At the door, her hand shook once before she found the right key. Dominic noticed. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice low enough to be calm and sharp enough to cut. Naomi did not turn around. "Someone who listened when your people thought silence meant ignorance." The key turned. The door opened into a narrow maintenance corridor lined with pipes, breaker boxes, and the warm breath of the building. It smelled of dust, copper, and old steam. Naomi stepped inside and pulled him after her. The door clicked shut just as an alarm began to pulse somewhere above them, not loud, not panicked, but official. A clean sound for a dirty plan. Dominic reached for his phone. No signal. Naomi said it before he could. They shielded this corridor after the last security upgrade. Victor approved it. Dominic's eyes hardened on her. "You know Victor Sloan." "I know his trash," she said. "I know his shredded drafts. I know he drinks black coffee at 2 in the morning and throws away the first page of every contract because he thinks nobody with a mop can read legal language." For the first time, Dominic looked less angry than unsettled. Naomi hurried forward, counting doors under her breath. Storage. Electrical. Linen return. Emergency stairwell. She stopped at the 3rd panel and pressed her thumb beneath a rusted latch Caleb had written about in one of his old notebooks. The wall section opened 3 inches, revealing a staff passage so narrow Dominic had to turn his shoulders to enter. He stared at it. "This is not on the building plan." Naomi met his eyes. "Neither is the elevator system that killed my brother." The words landed in the corridor and stayed there. Dominic's expression changed, but only slightly, like stone remembering it had once been human. Above them, on the 50th floor, the signing room would now be hearing that Dominic had suffered a private emergency, that no one should panic, that Victor Sloane had authority to proceed. Naomi knew the script because she had found the draft in a trash bag tied with a gold ribbon. She started down the hidden passage. "If we do not reach the old freight stairs in 3 minutes," she said, "they will own the cameras, the contracts, and the story." Dominic followed her into the dark. For the first time in his own tower, the most powerful man in Chicago had no map, no signal, and no one to trust except the woman his empire had trained itself not to see. The hidden passage narrowed until the walls brushed Dominic's sleeves and forced him to walk behind Naomi instead of beside her. It was the kind of place his architects had forgotten, a service vein running through the tower's polished body, warm with pipe heat and breathing the dusty smell of machinery. Naomi moved through it like someone following music only she could hear. 3 steps past the breaker box. Left at the rusted valve. Duck under the low beam Caleb had once described in a margin note. Dominic watched her back, the gray uniform, the neat braids, the steady shoulders, and felt the shape of his world changing with every foot they traveled. He owned the tower, but she knew its bones. Above them, the alarm pulsed in soft intervals, calm enough to sound rehearsed. Dominic tried his phone again. Still nothing. Then his watch vibrated once, showing a blocked internal message before the screen went black. Naomi glanced over her shoulder. "They have started early." "Who has?" She stopped beside a laundry chute wide enough to hide them from the corridor camera ahead. The glow from a red exit bulb touched her face, catching the strain she had kept buried since the elevator. "Victor Sloane," she said. "Claire Hastings. Nolan Pierce. At least 2 members of your board." Dominic's expression did not move, but the air around him seemed to go colder. Names like those did not leave a person's mouth without consequence. Naomi reached into the lining of her cleaning cart bag and pulled out a small black thumb drive taped beneath a packet of dryer sheets. She held it out, but when Dominic reached for it, she did not let go immediately. "This is not gossip," she said. "This is not a maid imagining things because rich people were rude to her. This is transaction history, access logs, copied elevator maintenance files, and a draft statement announcing that you were unable to attend tonight's signing due to a private medical emergency." Dominic's eyes locked on the drive. Naomi released it into his palm. It looked absurdly small there, a piece of plastic lighter than a cufflink, but it carried the weight of rooms, signatures, and betrayals. "How did you get this?" he asked. Naomi's voice stayed low. "I cleaned what they threw away. I photographed what they left open. I matched dates with my brother's old notes. His name was Caleb Brooks. He worked on your elevators before he died." The passage seemed to hold its breath. Dominic looked at her then, not like staff, not like a threat, but like a witness he should have heard long ago. Naomi swallowed once and continued before grief could make her stop. "Caleb found the first hidden access module. He reported it to the contractor. 2 days later, Victor approved an emergency upgrade that erased the record. 3 days after that, my brother was gone, and everyone with a title called it unfortunate." Her hands curled at her sides, but her eyes did not lower. "I came here for proof. I did not come here to save you. I came here to find the truth." Dominic said nothing. The honesty struck harder than flattery ever could. In his world, people begged, bargained, lied, and praised him because they wanted something. Naomi Brooks had risked everything and still refused to pretend he was innocent. A sound clicked beyond the wall. Footsteps. 2 voices in the service corridor. Moving fast but trying to stay quiet. Naomi took the thumb drive back, pressed it into a hidden slot behind a loose brick, and whispered, "If they find us with that, the truth disappears with us." Dominic leaned closer, his voice barely above the hum of the building. "Then where are we going?" Naomi looked toward the dark bend ahead, where an old freight staircase dropped behind the laundry rooms and climbed all the way to the 50th floor. To the only room where Victor needs everyone watching the wrong man, she said. And this time, they are going to watch me. The old freight staircase smelled of cold concrete, laundry soap, and metal that had carried too many secrets upward in silence. Naomi climbed fast, one hand skimming the rail, the other pressed against the pocket where she had hidden Caleb's folded receipt again. Dominic followed without complaint, though the climb from the 44th floor to the 50th was not built for men in tailored suits or polished shoes. Somewhere above them, voices echoed through vents, clean and distant, broken into fragments by the building's pipes. Victor's voice came first, calm enough to sound concerned. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. Mr. Whitmore has experienced a private medical situation inside the executive lift. Our security team is handling it." Naomi stopped on the landing below the 50th floor and lifted one finger to her lips. Dominic stood behind her, breathing evenly, his face unreadable except for the hard line at his jaw. Through a narrow maintenance grate, they could see part of the conference room beyond the wall. Crystal glasses. White roses. Board members shifting in leather chairs. Claire Hastings stood near the head of the table, one hand resting lightly on the back of Dominic's empty chair, her expression soft with practiced worry. She looked heartbroken in exactly the right lighting. Naomi had to admire the cruelty of it. Claire did not need to shout, did not need to threaten, did not need to look guilty. She simply looked beautiful, anxious, and believable, the kind of woman cameras trusted before they trusted facts. Victor placed the gray folder on the table. "Under the continuity clause," he said, "the board has authority to proceed in Mr. Whitmore's absence if a temporary incapacity prevents him from attending." A silver-haired board member frowned. "Temporary incapacity?" Victor lowered his eyes as if the words hurt him. "We all hope it is temporary." Claire pressed a hand to her mouth, and the room softened around her. Naomi saw the trap close without a sound. This was not an attack meant to leave broken glass and headlines. This was quieter. Cleaner. A signature turned into a cage. A medical excuse turned into a legal doorway. Dominic would be isolated between floors, unreachable, while Victor used emergency powers to shift control of the ports, hotels, shell companies, and private accounts into a new holding structure. By morning, Dominic could walk back into the tower alive and still find his empire locked away from him, sealed by men who would smile and say they had acted in his best interest. Dominic watched Claire through the grate. For the first time since Naomi had met him, something beyond anger crossed his face. Not heartbreak, exactly. Recognition. The cold pain of a man realizing betrayal had been sitting beside him at dinner, laughing softly, choosing flowers, learning the names of his allies only to count which ones could be bought. Naomi whispered, "She is not here to mourn you. She is here to inherit the room before anyone knows you are gone." Dominic's eyes did not leave Claire. "How long have you known?" "Long enough to know she never loved the man," Naomi said. "She loved the doors his name opened." Inside the conference room, Victor slid a pen toward the board chairman. Claire leaned closer and spoke with trembling sweetness. Dominic would want the company protected. Naomi felt the word strike something deep and old inside her, the same polite tone people had used when explaining Caleb's death to her family, as if soft voices could make theft sound like care. Dominic stepped back from the grate. The air around him changed again, not louder, not wilder, but colder and more certain. "Naomi," he said, using her first name for the first time, "what happens if they sign?" She looked through the grate at the gray folder, then at the woman pretending to grieve. "Then your empire becomes their story," she said. "And men like Victor know the first person who controls the story usually controls the truth." Dominic did not move for several seconds. He stood in the narrow space behind the maintenance grate, listening to Victor turn betrayal into procedure and Claire turn ambition into sorrow, and something inside him seemed to settle into a silence deeper than anger. Naomi had expected rage. Men like him were supposed to explode when control slipped from their hands. But Dominic Whitmore did not explode. He became still, so still the old stairwell seemed to tighten around him. Then he turned to her, and his voice was quiet enough to be mistaken for mercy. "Your brother found this before anyone else." Naomi nodded once. "Caleb found the access module while checking a complaint about uneven lift speed. The private elevator was stopping 2 inches off level on the 50th floor. Small issue, easy repair. But when he opened the panel, he found a second control path buried behind the manufacturer system. Somebody had made the elevator obey another master." Dominic's eyes narrowed. "Why did he not come to me?" Naomi's mouth tightened, not in fear this time, but in the old bitterness of a sister who had carried too many polite condolences. "Because men like you do not build doors for men like my brother." He reported it to his supervisor. His supervisor reported it to Victor. Then the report disappeared. Dominic took that in without defending himself, and the absence of excuse was the first decent thing Naomi had seen from him. Through the grate, the board chairman lifted the pen. Victor leaned forward, almost smiling now. Naomi felt the moment slipping. She reached into her shoe and pulled out Caleb's folded receipt. The paper was worn soft from being opened in the dark, studied under cheap kitchen light, and pressed between her palms on nights when doubt tried to win. She handed it to Dominic. He unfolded it carefully, as if the dead deserved gentleness even from dangerous men. "Whitmore Tower. Elevator. Trust no one." Dominic read the words twice. His face changed on the second reading. Not dramatically. Not for sympathy. But enough. Naomi whispered, "Caleb did not know about the board. He did not know about Claire. He only knew there was a hidden system inside your building, and that somebody powerful wanted it kept hidden." The next morning, his records were deleted. The contractor blamed him. The insurance company blamed him. People in suits told my mother the case was closed before we even finished burying him. Inside the conference room, Claire's voice floated through the grate. "We all know Dominic valued decisiveness." Naomi closed her eyes for half a second. The word valued hit her harder than it should have. People always spoke beautifully when stealing from the absent. Dominic looked from Caleb's note to Naomi. "I signed the contractor renewal that week," he said. Naomi opened her eyes. The admission stood between them, heavier than denial. He did not say he had known. He did not say he had meant it. But he had signed something. He had trusted men who were not worthy of trust. He had built an empire so tall that a good man could disappear inside its machinery and never reach his door. Naomi's voice dropped. "Then tonight is not just about saving your company. It is about deciding whether the truth matters when it comes from someone your world was trained to ignore." Dominic folded Caleb's note once, then placed it inside the inner pocket of his suit, close to his heart. In the conference room, the chairman lowered the pen toward the signature line. Dominic looked at Naomi Brooks, no longer through her, no longer past her, and said, "Then we walk in with the truth first." Dominic stepped out of the maintenance stairwell first, but he did not take the room the way everyone expected him to. He did not slam the door. He did not raise his voice. He simply opened the side entrance behind the projection wall and walked into the 50th floor conference room with dust on one sleeve, Caleb's note in his pocket, and Naomi Brooks at his side. The chairman's pen froze above the paper. Victor Sloan looked up, and for one perfect second, the mask slipped from his face. Not enough for the room to understand, but enough for Dominic to see the truth arrive before the explanation. Claire Hastings turned from the windows, her hand still pressed to her chest, the picture of concern collapsing into something colder. The room went silent so completely that the elevator alarm on the far wall could be heard blinking in soft red pulses. Dominic looked at the gray folder on the table, then at Victor. "Continue," he said. Victor swallowed. "Dominic, thank God. We were told there had been a medical emergency." "You were told," Dominic said, "because you wrote it." No one breathed. A board member shifted in his chair. Claire took one careful step forward, trying to recover the room with softness. "Dominic, you are upset. Let us handle this privately." Dominic did not look at her. "Miss Brooks," he said, and the formality of it struck the room harder than a shout. "Please show them what you found." Naomi felt every eye turn toward her, not with respect at first, but with confusion. She was still in her gray uniform. A faint streak of dust marked one sleeve. Her shoes were work shoes. Her badge still said night services. She looked like someone who should have been replacing towels, not standing beside the most feared man in Chicago while a boardroom waited for her to speak. For a moment, old training rose in her throat. "Keep your head down. Do not make trouble. Be grateful for the job." Then she thought of Caleb's hands, always smelling of metal and soap, turning broken things whole again. Naomi walked to the conference screen and connected the thumb drive with steady fingers. The first file appeared, a maintenance log Victor had claimed never existed. Then access records. Then elevator override codes. Then the draft medical statement with Victor's initials hidden in the metadata. Each image landed on the screen like a door unlocking. Naomi did not dramatize. She did not plead. She simply explained dates, badges, accounts, and signatures with the calm precision of a woman who had been forced to prove her own grief before anyone would call it truth. Victor tried to interrupt once. Dominic lifted one hand, and Victor stopped mid-word. Claire's champagne glass trembled against the table before she set it down too quickly. Naomi clicked to the final file, a chain of transfers moving control of Whitmore assets into a holding company registered 2 states away, with Victor as emergency trustee and Claire as beneficiary through a private trust. The chairman slowly removed his glasses. The entire room understood at the same time. This had not been protection. It had been theft dressed in legal language. Dominic turned to the board. "Every agreement on this table is suspended. Every account named in those files is frozen before midnight. Every person who signed on to this will answer in daylight, with counsel present, on record." Then he looked at Naomi, and his voice changed, not softer, but cleaner. "Caleb Brooks tried to warn my company, and my company failed him. Tonight, his sister did what none of you had the courage to do. She listened to the truth when it was inconvenient." No one looked at Naomi's uniform after that. They looked at her face. Her eyes stayed steady. And for the first time since she had entered Whitmore Tower through the service door, Naomi Brooks was not invisible. By midnight, Whitmore Tower no longer sounded like a building celebrating a deal. It sounded like a place waking from a long and expensive lie. Lawyers arrived through the main lobby with sealed briefcases. Account managers whispered into phones behind glass doors. Board members who had once spoken over janitors now stood in corners with their jackets open and their faces drained of certainty. Victor Sloan sat alone at the end of the conference table, no longer smooth, no longer untouchable, while outside counsel reviewed every file Naomi had placed on the screen. Claire Hastings did not cry. That was what Naomi noticed most. Once the room stopped believing her performance, the softness vanished, and only calculation remained. She left under escort with her pearls still shining beneath the white conference lights, but no one followed her with sympathy. They followed her with questions. Dominic did not celebrate. He stood beside the window overlooking Chicago, his hands in his pockets, the city reflected across his face like a judgment he had finally agreed to read. For years, he had believed power meant controlling every door, every account, every person close enough to betray him. Yet the person who saved him had entered through the service entrance, carried towels instead of credentials, and owned nothing in that tower except the truth. Naomi stood near the screen, unsure what to do with her hands now that nobody was asking her to clean. The gray uniform felt heavier than before, not because she was ashamed of it, but because the room had finally learned how much dignity it had ignored. Dominic turned from the window and walked toward her. Every conversation around them faded. He stopped at a respectful distance, then took Caleb's folded receipt from his inner pocket and handed it back with both hands. "Your brother deserved an answer," he said. "Your mother deserves one too." Naomi held the paper carefully, her throat tightening in a way she refused to let become tears in front of these people. Dominic looked toward the board, then back at her. "As of tonight, there will be an independent investigation into Caleb Brooks's case. The contractor, the upgrade records, the deleted reports, all of it. Nothing buried. Nothing polished. Nothing called unfortunate because the truth is inconvenient." The chairman nodded quickly, but Dominic did not look at him for approval. Then he said the words that changed the room more than any accusation had. "Miss Brooks will oversee the internal audit of this tower's security systems. She will have full access, full protection, and full authority to speak without permission from anyone at this table." The silence that followed was different from the first one. The first silence had been fear. This one was recognition. Naomi looked at the long table, at the polished folders, at the faces that had mistaken her quiet for emptiness. She did not smile. Not yet. Some wounds did not close because powerful men finally noticed them. But she stood straighter, and that was enough. The next morning, the staff entrance was unlocked when she arrived, but Dominic was already there, waiting beside Mrs. Alvarez with a new badge in his hand. It did not say Night Services. It said Naomi Brooks, Security Integrity Director. For a moment, she thought of Caleb and the kitchen table where he rebuilt. Broken radios just to hear them sing again. Then she clipped the badge to her coat and stepped through the lobby doors, not as a shadow moving around other people's power, but as a woman whose truth had forced an empire to kneel. And that day, the tower remembered that dignity is not granted by the powerful. It is revealed when the ignored refuse to disappear.